Hi everyone joining in right now. Let's just give a few more minutes for the people to be able to join. Hi everyone joining in right now. All right. A few more people coming in. Thank you for your patience. All right. And I believe it's time to get started. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming and for taking the time to attend this webinar. I really believe that this is a topic worth discussing, and I really hope that, as we promised, we will be able to show you something that that's more rare, and you will find it valuable and worth your time. Just a quick introduction round to start with. Attila here will be our keynote speaker. He is the founder and CEO of Bugproof, and he has more than a decade of experience when it comes to embedded device security. Previously, he worked at Sony and Varian Medical Systems. So basically, he has a lot of experience both with consumer and with medical devices, even though our case studies this time will be a bit more in a different field. I am Dora. I am the marketing lead here at Bugproof, and this time my job will be to keep everything running smoothly, both here on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live. We are live on both platforms. A couple of housekeeping rules. So you will receive both the recording and the slides, so you don't need to make a lot of notes here. You will receive everything. Those of you who signed up via Zoom, you will receive it via email probably tomorrow. And those of you who came to LinkedIn Live, you will receive it via LinkedIn message probably tomorrow or the day after as well. We will have a Q&A section at the end. Please feel free to post your questions both on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live, and we will cover all of them at the end. So if you don't have any more questions, then I give the microphone to Attila to get us started.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. As Dora said, I'm Attila, founder and CEO of Bugproof, and this is Finding Vulnerabilities in Embedded Systems. We'll look at 3 case studies of IoT vulnerabilities that we discovered, and I hope you enjoy it. So basically, with Bugproof, we founded the company with the vision of restoring trust in embedded systems, and therefore we felt it important to set up a research team, a little research team, that independently and regularly conducts security research of popular embedded systems. So in the past 18 months, we reported more than 50 different vulnerabilities to many bigger names that you might recognize: Asus, Broadcom, Netgear, Silicon Labs, Honeywell, and so on. I think it's not too bad for a team of 3, at least for the security research department that we have going. Also, as you probably know, due to the large number of vulnerabilities in the IoT space, the industry is starting to become more and more regulated. So there's a lot of buzz around them. In fact, last time we covered the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, with our friend Cedric from CETOM. But in this presentation, we'll focus on some of the practical security considerations, as creating truly secure IoT devices is a complex task, regardless of which compliance scheme you had to adhere to. And using my our collective security professional experience, I try to highlight our approach to finding these vulnerabilities, and I will try to conclude with some actionable insight to both technical people and business stakeholders as well. So these are the three CVs that we are going to look into, three case studies. Some of these are actually more CVs. We just selected one of them each. We'll look at a popular Silicon Labs SDK used for many resource-constrained real-time operating system devices, so smaller devices, low-energy devices. We'll look at a standard consumer IP camera product from Zavio, and we will conclude with a popular Broadcom router SDK that was used for most of the consumer IoT router devices that you could have found in your local electronics shops, and you probably used some of these if you are located in the EU at least. So let's jump in. But before we start, let's look at the agenda. So for each of these, we'll look at how what problems we found, how the remediation process looked like, a bit look into the internals of coordinated disclosure process and how it goes. We will look at how these particular problems were fixed and how similar secure coding issues should generally be fixed either via manual effort or automation. And in general, we will try to draw some conclusions around how to prevent such issues from happening. There will be parts in the webinar which will be quite technical. Still, we have much more technical details on our blog for each of these cases if you're interested. So if you're a security researcher, feel free to dive into those after the webinar. But I try to make this sort of self-contained to the degree that product owners, embedded developers, compliance managers are very much welcome to join as well. And actually, I'll please, Dora, we do have a poll on this to have just an understanding of your background to help us proceed. So please check whatever best describes your current role in your organization, and I will wait.
Yeah, and this is unfortunately only possible to show to those who attend from Zoom. So we just ask for a little bit of patience from the LinkedIn community. We are just asking the role of the audience here in Zoom. Okay, few more moments. And 3, 2, 1. Ending poll, and to share the results with you.
Okay.
So basically, mostly we have security researchers. About half of the audience here is a security researcher. And we also have a few embedded developers, C-level founders, product owners, and some coming from other fields, which is interesting. And it would be interesting to know what those are. But anyway, so Attila, it's okay to go deeper in some occasions.
All right. Yeah, this sounds good. There will be one case study where I will go a little bit deeper. And yeah, with this majority of security researchers, I will be happy to take any questions again at the Q&A part because some of those might not be answered directly in the slides. But then let's continue. So our first case study is this CV with Silicon Labs. So it affected Silicon Labs up to version 4.02. Basically, their main SDK is something they call Gecko SDK, and it ships with a real-time operating system, Micrium, especially tailored for these constrained devices or the kind of wireless chips that they manufacture. These also include different libraries, networking stack, and on top of the networking stack, it actually features an HTTP server code base that can be used for various applications. We are, of course, not sure how many applications use this code base, the HTTP server, but if it is in use with the vulnerable version, we think the issue can be detrimental to the security of the device, as we will see. So as you can see, we reported this to Silicon Labs, and the MVD analysts rated it as 9.8 critical, so it is as bad as it can get. Basically, using an HTTP request to this HTTP server, a remote attacker, so basically anyone on the internet who can reach devices exposing this networking interface can remotely execute code. Here in the context of real-time operating system, the issue is also worsened by the allocator. This is a special allocator, and just a lack of memory protection that rich operating systems like Linux provide. We don't have that. So actually there are multiple ways, non-trivial ways, but very effective ways to exploit this vulnerability. So this is a big problem. Technically speaking, this is a heap-based buffer overflow, which is one of the most common memory corruption vulnerabilities out there. It is especially problematic here. It can cause problems in the application space as well, even if you have a hardened system. But in the IoT use cases, again, just having these different components and having lack of memory protection makes this a very dangerous kind of vulnerability. So how did we discover it? So at that point, we were actually evaluating our platform with Silicon Labs already. And first of all, we just looked at the SDK and selected a target. So the whole, checking the whole code base is not easy. So first, and this should be part of most secure software development lifecycle, you should have some kind of threat model. And for IoT use cases, one threat model would be to assume an external attacker able to reach the networking interfaces of your device. And this is how we selected this particular HTTP server, because here, when networking code is involved in a code base, you can be sure that many of the attacker control data will reach big code coverage. And with that, if there are complexities in the code, if there are vulnerabilities in the code, those will be likely triggered. So with that said, we selected this target, so this HTTP library and server components, and ran our code analysis engine PRIS on the binary. PRIS uses different static analysis techniques on binary especially. And for this case, we just use the phase, which is a sort of well-known or moderately known secure coding pattern that we were able to discover using our static analysis, where there was a parsing mistake in the HTTP server code. So HTTP servers manage all the requests that come in from browsers or other HTTP clients. And this is a formatted structured data which needs parsing on the backend of the code. And there are many mistakes to commit here. And one such mistake is using unsafe functions like string copy. This will be usually flagged by many static analyzers tools or even compilers. But there is a specific use case which is maybe not super well known among developers, is even if you use the unsafe, even if you use a safe version, strn copy, where you can limit the number of the copy using the n parameter. If that end parameter is parameterized by attacker control data. Again, here the issue is the attacker being able to modify these parameters. You can reduce such insecure invocations to an unsafe function essentially, and this is what happened here. So the root cause is a secure coding mistake, not super obvious, but it can still be found with a binary analysis only. And it is important to know that many of these memory corruption issues actually happen with parsing. So parsing is a notoriously difficult task, whether it is file formats, protocol formats. Parsing that dense structured data is not easy, especially in memory unsafe languages. But so we use our binary analysis engine, and just to provide you with a hint of the internals of how it goes, and this will be the most complex diagram of the presentation, just as a sneak peek into one of our program analysis phases. This is how the particular function looked like inside the internals of our engine. It is, if you are familiar with reaching definition analysis of if you heard the data flow analysis term before, this is basically what we're doing. So we're lifting the binary code to something that we can comprehend better using this graph structure. And on the box, the fourth box from the bottom, it's maybe small, but basically that's the point of this tainted pointer subtraction that's causing the problem. So again, if two pointers are tainted and there's a subtraction operation ending up in this particular function, there's a problem with that. If you're interested in more details, we have write-up on this as well on our knowledge base. But really the takeaway here is that this is a non-trivial pattern, even if you have the source code, but with our tooling, luckily we were able to discovered this and reported it to Broadcom. So once we reported them, they were very they acknowledged the issue and triaged it in a couple of days, and officially confirmed the issue in August. So it was late May when we reported it, and we were engaging the product security team. They engaged the product teams, and they released the patch with a new version of their SDK. And as you can see, for these kind of buffer overflows, whether it's a linear buffer overflow or something simpler than this particular case, it is often the case that you can just limit the size of the copy. So this was introduced in this commit, as you can see. So the length parameter that was calculated based on this attacker controlled input coming from the HTTP request was maximized in a fixed length, and this made sure that the buffer was not overflown anymore, and this eliminated this buffer overflow. Still, in general, I think if you look at this code base, it has been around for a while. It's generally pretty high code quality, mature code base, but still these things exist in the wild, and they need careful consideration when you are implementing them. Now, how can you prevent these? So there's a lot of information available on how to prevent like simple buffer overflows in C. You can find information on this on our knowledge base as well, but on the internet. But just as a personal experience of mine, recently we attended the Embedded World conference, where I was positively surprised, the adoption of the Rust programming language in the industry is getting more and more traction. So basically, one modern solution would be, to the problem would be not using C at all, and using switching into some more recent language, or at least some other language that mitigates much of the memory safety issues. With Rust, array and vector accesses are automatically checked to ensure they are within valid ranges. And Rust also disallows direct pointer arithmetic in safe code, minimizing the impact of this particular issue. And ownership and borrowing, these rules ensure references are always valid within the bond. So Rust is really good for security, but still, and we don't have a poll here, but my estimate would be that 80–90% of you working on IoT devices are still kind of stuck with whatever comes with the reference implementation. And at least you have to interface some kind of C++ code along the way. Most of the Linux kernel, of course, is primarily in C. So there is no way around these issues as of now. Although if you're implementing application level facilities on top of an SDK, if you have the possibility of choosing something, some other programming language, it is a safe option. But the usual wisdom for the current C++ governed IoT world is lots of secure coding related and platform related security controls. Input validation is it cannot be stressed enough. Basically, you have to be sure that you are aware in design phase of the potentially user controlled input that you're dealing with. You should also introduce as many boundary checks as you can. You should avoid dangerous functions. These will be flagged by most platforms, including Backproof, but also most of your static analyzers. But again, even the safe-looking counterparts can be abused in many cases. And once these are exploited, or at least these vulnerabilities are misused, there are runtime solutions to mitigate the impact. So with just looking into your build toolchain, there are many compiler flags that you can check in development mode. So you would look into address sanitizers, and you can also just enable many hardening flags like compiling positional independent binaries to help address space layout randomization, and you can limit relocations to be read-only, and various other things that you can find more information on our blog as well. But essentially, it's down to process. So code reviews are super important. In our experience, like bigger enterprises have like security champions within product teams. They advocate for security during code reviews and the development process. Also, you might want to look into automated tools. So again, C++ source code static analyzers are usually good to detect of these kind of vulnerabilities, but there might be false positives. Fuzzers have less false positives, but you have to come up with a harness. Fuzzers have to be adapted to your code, and in my experience, at least, they are very good for parser code, and they're very good for. There are many ways to fuzz different web browsers as well, but and protocols as well. But these are dynamic tools, and so compared to static analysis, this might not be super easy to integrate with within your CI/CD pipeline. And you can also use something like Bugproof for IoT firmware and binary-based analysis of your embedded system devices. So next up, we have another interesting case study. This is a consumer IP camera manufacturer that unfortunately appears to be out of business now, completely unrelated to our own activities. But basically using a collection of again, like popular IoT firmware, we analyzed different product lines within their product portfolio and reported a lot of vulnerabilities in 2022. At that time, our emails didn't bounce. At that time, it seemed that they are sharing information on their website. And definitely in certain camera classes like bullet cameras and license plate cameras, they appear to have a large market share. And many installations in the US and the EU through various distributors as well. So our report was quite huge. We reported 32 vulnerabilities in different products, which was essentially eventually grouped together into five identifiers. These CVs I listed out there, and this affected all of these camera models that you see here. The impact, again, being a remote code execution vulnerability is 9.8. So these are, again, those kind of IoT vulnerabilities that you don't want to see. This allows for mass compromise of devices. You can take over lots of devices, assemble them into a botnet, execute denial of service attacks, and these will likely result in the largest breaches that you often hear of. If you remember the Mirai botnet, it used lower complexity entry points, just like hard-coded credentials, but using these vulnerabilities, the same would have been possible with these cameras. How did we find this? Again, we just uploaded. This is our production platform. We took a bunch of this firmware, which was publicly available, uploaded to our platform, Backproof, and a feature called PRIS. And already using the secure coding metrics that we collect, we saw that here there is a problem with really using a lot of unsafe functions, and the code analysis engine indicated a lot more actual buffer overflows in a component called OnWIF. So it really prompted our interest to look into OnWIF. I was familiar with what OnWIF is, but basically, for those that you don't know, OnWIF is an industry alliance and also a set of specifications that IP surveillance vendors can use to interconnect all the different camera vendors within their surveillance systems. And this, again, also means, cannot be stressed enough, that these IoT devices, the largest attack surface for these IoT devices are network-facing attack surfaces. And just by the nature of how these are installed, the surveillance systems will have some TCP/IP connectivity to the actual cameras. And usually these are actually reachable from the public internet. So we definitely looked into this OnWIF binary. Again, we found something like 30 different buffer overflows stemming from the same root cause. But I wanted to highlight here, and this will be, again, quite technical, a command injection here, which is not even Python or not even these high-level languages really mitigate against command injections. You really have to be careful about these. And this was one example. So this OnWIF daemon, this service that's running on these cameras, are processing requests. Like, you are able to set parameters like changing the resolution. You can set the date that's printed on the camera. You can, via OnWIF, you can do all sorts of different administrative tasks. And the OnWIF protocol uses XML. It was specified a while ago, so it's not something more succinct. It's an XML SOAP-based protocol. And what we see here in this particular firmware is that there were custom modifications made to the BOA web server. The BOA web server is a pretty solid HTTP server when taken as an open source component. But many of the IoT manufacturers we see do modifications in these open source components. And in many cases, those modifications end up security relevant. And this was the case here. And also we see what we saw that is that there's an unsafe reuse of functionality. So there's this param box that you see on the right. This was another service running on this camera. And its purpose was to really validate. It was basically input validation. It wanted to validate the inputs coming from the requests and from local services as well. But actually, the combination of these two things I listed out here, there was a flow where you could make the OnWIF daemon trigger a certain video encoder setting that would end up calling back to the BOA web server and trigger this other path. And the way it was done, it was used via a non-standard way. It ended up being interpreted, your user input that you can see here. Basically, this reboot command was actually interpreted by this last stage in the parent binary, which triggered this command injection. So the uncontrolled and untrusted attacker data again ended up with a system execution in the operating system. So that's definitely a problem. How could you prevent these things? For buffer overflows, the fix is the same as we discussed earlier. Command injections can be detected using static analysis with dynamic analysis tools as well. But again, those can lead to many false positives. So in many designs, many good designs, I saw that these were centralized and there was a dedicated service for such calls to use IPC to sanitize the input. Input validation can involve character filtering, and OS command injections are often worsened by not having proper isolation, not having strict privilege separation on the system. So if you have sandboxing mechanisms such as LXC or limiting privileges, those should definitely be done. So even like 5-6 years ago, I saw LXC-based sandboxes that mitigated these issues fairly well, using facilities provided by the Linux kernel. How were the actual issues fixed by Zavio? Actually, none of the issues were fixed. We simply couldn't reach the vendor, even though our initial emails did not bounce. So therefore, we reached out to US Homeland Security and the main US distributor, and they picked up the case. But this ended up being a very long coordination process. So from December 2022, we coordinated with them to September 2023. This involved just acquiring a camera in their lab, sending our exploit code to them, and coordinating back and forth with the distributor and us on the technical problems. But essentially, CISA released a security advisory, and we recommended that all users of this device should just replace their cameras. And I think at this point it's important to note that this is a well-known problem, is that these IoT devices just launch and then there are no security updates, or if there are security updates, those have to be manually updated by the customer, and there isn't really an extended security support. Upcoming compliance standards, luckily, will actually mandate this to mitigate consumer impact. And our next and final case study will be this Broadcom router SDK. Why this specific vulnerability? Because I think it really illustrates supply chain problems. Those are not solved by SBOMs. It also illustrates problems with out-of-date kernel code. So the Linux kernel has their own security standards, but this driver was one that was provided by Broadcom on a separate channel. It will be also interesting to see that this is not a very complex issue, but it's still difficult to find with existing automation. Also, it has been dormant for almost a decade. So because of it was in a binary, nobody actually discovered it. This is the technical description. Basically, it's a kernel driver, and it allows attackers to execute code. But this is a local privilege escalation. So basically, it has to be chained together with another buffer overflow similar issue to have the highest impact. For less technical audience members, the kernel is the heart of Linux-based IoT systems. So confusing its internals means that someone can completely take over the device. So that's a problem. And the way it is distributed, that like SoC vendors have different customers, like different vendors like TP-Link, Asus, Aris. These are router manufacturers that you might have heard of. They receive the reference SDK, the reference implementation, and they branch off. They implement cloud services, mobile applications, a different branding for the web interfaces, and it's hard to deliver them and merge back security updates, unfortunately. So it was highlighted by how we discovered this problem. We looked at a Netgear device, and we found some simple buffer overflows. We notified Broadcom, as it was obvious that this was originated from their SDK, but they told us that, hey, actually this was fixed a long time ago upstream. Still, the latest version of this Netgear firmware shipped with the issue and assigned this PSV identifier to the vulnerability. So this was on the user space side. And basically, at this point, we had no idea what EMF was, but it was obvious that the vulnerable user space component had a kernel mode part. So these two things are separate modes of security operation. And let's just say we just dig deeper to see what else could be there. So using a mix of reverse engineering and a program analysis engine, we found the bug. And in order to verify it, I actually bought an Asus device just from marketplace.
Oh, it seems like we lost Attila for a moment. I hope it's nothing serious, and he will join back in a moment. I hope that in the meantime you find whatever was discussed so far useful for your organization. And yeah, we will be really curious to hear your questions and yeah, what devices are interesting for you. Maybe you can even recommend something like for our security team to check up on next, because we are always happy to take on any recommendations. And obviously, if it's a device where we have the firmware available or where it's easy to get the device, then that could be a target for our security research team. Yeah, Attila is back.
Sorry,
Great.
I'm back. I had some glitch with my computer. I will continue from here. So I was. This is just the problem with live webinars. Sorry again for this.
Oh, it's fine. At least no one can accuse us of just doing some pre-recorded stuff.
Yep. So here were we with this slide, right? So basically, can you hear me well, Dora?
Yes, always good.
And the slides is there. Okay, thank you very much for your patience, and sorry for this hiccup. So these were simple buffer overflows, and Netgear still shipped with them. So that prompted us to look deeper, because we suspected that there was more there. So we looked into the kernel space. And also for me as a security researcher, it was also always kind of an interesting thing to look into kernel code as well. So we used a mix of reverse engineering. I required this Asus router because it was using the same SoC, and I managed to actually customize it. I even ran Doom on it to get familiar with the code that I was working with, and using that and looking into the GPL code of this kernel driver, we found the bug. So the bug itself, every piece of code that's highly complex might contain, again, secure coding mistakes. And this particular feature that was used here is called EMF. It is also called IGMP snooping. And the business use case for it is, in layman terms, and I actually didn't really know this beforehand, is to relieve the multicast traffic from the network using some more sophisticated routing techniques. So, for example, if you have IPTV, multiple IPTV endpoints in your home, you're probably using a router that supports this to reduce the load on your local network. But the bottom line in terms of secure coding is that in this kernel module, the user could manipulate all the networking interfaces that could be grouped together to form these sort of bridges. And again, it was a secure coding mistake when you could upload a large number of these data into a linked list. But when you were listing these interfaces via a different sort of netlink call, the boundary again wasn't checked. So this resulted in an overwrite, something like a buffer overflow, but in this case, I would say this was an out of bounds write with this list EFN3 array. So here on the right, you can see this strn copy. At first, it looks nice, but once you realize that the linked list that it gets as input can grow indefinitely, this becomes a huge problem. And I actually took some time to exploit it, see how I can turn the proof of concept of crashing my router to privilege escalation. And on the right side, you can see that I was able to get from a normal user to root user. So this is a local privilege escalation vulnerability. And unfortunately, most IoT threat models don't even prioritize it, unfortunately, because there are so many remote code execution vectors that these issues, which I believe are pretty problematic, so this particular issue could enable a container escape, if you know that. So you could escape a Docker container, or if this was on a workstation or a cloud VM, this would be a huge problem. Again, application security world really find this vulnerability to be troublesome. In the IoT world, unfortunately, we have much bigger issues to worry about. Still, it received a CVSS score of 7 for in3 kernel drivers. And we also demonstrated that in a Netgear device, we were able to chain this with another bug that we found to have like this completely catastrophic impact on that device. Coordinated with Broadcom, again, successful coordinated disclosure with our professional product security team. But still, again, this affected 70 different router models. And we are just not aware, we don't know how many of these were actually backported into those models. Because again, logistics of delivering that patch is very difficult as of today. And we believe that once these router manufacturers made lots of modifications, merging back this kind of binary to their firmware might not be easy. So we definitely need something more of an agile process and more collaboration from the stakeholders to enable effective security. It's also interesting to see, again, this remained dormant for 10 years. And why is that? So I believe automation may not be easy for these kind of vulnerabilities, even though it's not an extremely complex exploit. And this stems from the fact that this required not just recognizing a simple pattern like before, like a buffer copy, but you really had to take into consideration this linked list semantics. And also, in this case, you might not even have the source code. So if you don't have the source code, it's your supplier's proprietary code. You can't really track these vulnerabilities easily unless you have a binary analysis platform. And again, those source code analyzers will flag lots of false positives. And even if this was flagged by some static analyzers, it would have been missed by many embedded developers. Still, in the case of kernel vulnerabilities, it has to be mentioned that if there is time and if the process allows, like everyone's encouraged by the kernel developers to get their drivers upstream, and that would likely prevent these type of issues. Are the Linux kernel people are very serious about code and security in general. So summarizing, we had 2 remote code execution flows with Silicon Labs and Zavio. Silicon Labs, the impact is probably lower because this HTTP server might not be present everywhere. But with Zavio, with all of the cameras we tested, it was present. So a large number of cameras could be weaponized for assembling a botnet. Whereas with Broadcom, it's a medium severity issue. Depends on the context, but with Netgear, it was a 6.7, almost a high severity vulnerability. And looking at the difficulty of fixing, Silicon Labs fixed it with a boundary check that I showed you earlier. So that's a simple fix. But, thinking about the cost of actually managing this process, having a Jira ticket submitted, having the coordination effort between product security and engineering. This is lots of engineering hours, even to fix an issue like that. And also, if you have one such vulnerability, you would actually probably task your team of finding similar issues within the same code base so this doesn't happen again. So this can really take up months. With Zavio, the difficulty level of fixing this is hard because really there we saw a lack of secure coding practices. So much of the firmware should have been redesigned with strict secure coding practices. So there I would estimate like months even to completely fix those issues. Whereas with Broadcom, the patch management would be hard, as we just discussed, but the secure coding itself would be, again, a boundary check. Still, Broadcom is a large enterprise, large organization. It was not easy to, again, get the balls rolling on the development side. So I would say it was still costly for them to fix this issue, even though we are the white hat guys and not the bad guys. Definitely, it was found that as something exploited in the white, that would have been much more costly. When looking at prevention via automation, something that we touched on, the Silicon Labs case is different because, again, there's this libc, there's this RTOS. These use cases are not really supported that well with application tooling that you can buy off the shelf. With Zavio cameras, yeah, those low-hanging problems could be found with automation fairly easily. So at least you would have a long list of vulnerabilities to look over. And with Broadcom, again, this is not a common secure coding pattern. It's kernel code. Without specific kernel rule sets, it would be difficult to find this with automation. For kernel vulnerabilities, actually, there are pretty good runtime tools that you could use. If you look at the number of days of resolution, with Silicon Labs, it was almost 70 days. With Broadcom, it was 106. And Zavio, as we discussed, didn't really solve the issue. We suggested people to just replace their cameras, and this was the official recommendation by the U.S. Homeland Security Cyber Security Department as well. So we were quite surprised, like these deadlines average up to like a 90-day disclosure processes. These are industry standards. I personally believe that you could do better. You could do like 45 days. This is what I believe Carnegie Mellon cyber security incident response team policies have in place. But 90 days should be enough to fix these vulnerabilities. So Silicon Labs was responsive, professional. Broadcom, again, proactive, but they asked for a small extension to the timeline, as you can see above. So what are the takeaways? The IoT world is still full of vulnerabilities, even if these are pretty big names. Here, many issues are still due to C being memory unsafe, and the lack of input validation and other secure coding practices are still a problem. The US government is now advocating for getting rid of the memory unsafe languages and getting rid of memory unsafe problems. Rust is a good initiative, and again, you can look into good security compliance standards that you can support with tooling to get rid of those. Still, I think standard security tooling is likely inadequate for most IoT use cases as of today. Another takeaway is that coordinating and fixing simple bugs can take months, even though they are discovered quickly. So in some cases, we discovered these in minutes, and we were able to generate a working exploit within an hour, to be honest. And on the flip side, there's a big asymmetry here, because in a big organization and enterprise, even if we disclose these in a coordinated effort, this can trigger a lot of engineering and coordination work. So the best ways to catch these things early, and so you should implement security practices throughout the SDLC that cannot be stressed enough. And these were 0 days at the time of discoveries, so it's a must to manage your open source dependencies. Your known vulnerabilities have a detailed software bill of materials, but for complete security, you really need to invest in secure coding, IoT security testing tools, and you should really make the process flawless between your security folks and embedded developers. And this pretty much concludes my presentation here. And so this will be the time for questions, I believe.
All right. Thank you so much, Attila. And yeah, as you said, let's go over the questions, and everyone else, please feel free to post more. So the first one, I think we touched upon it, although not in detail. So the question was, how important is it to create a working proof of concept for the vulnerability? For example, to actually enable remote code execution in comparison to just finding a buffer overflow and reporting it. I understand actually weaponizing the buffer overflow might be way more difficult than just discovering it.
Yes. So for coordinated disclosure, it's usually enough to report a proof of concept. Weaponizing is definitely harder, because it involves lots of memory feng shui and adjusting for offsets and so on. In general, when you're reporting vulnerabilities in IoT, my experience is that if you can demonstrate the issue with a little POC, then that should be enough. So for example, the Broadcom case, I was able to just write a six-line bash script first, and that was enough to demonstrate it to Broadcom team that this was a problem. But then later on, for the purposes of another presentation, I actually worked a lot on getting a working exploit. In general, as white hat hackers, as bug bounty practitioners, I think the POCs are enough to demonstrate.
All right, thank you. Next question. Is there any framework or methodology that is followed to perform embedded system security testing?
These are being worked on. So again, last time we touched on the Cyber Resilience Act. Right now, there's an ETSI standard for consumer IT that mandates a lot of these things I said. So lack of hard-coded credentials, input validation, system integrity, a mature coordinated disclosure process. So these are clearly laid out in that ETSI standard. I believe the Senelec task force is tasked with another IoT security standards. And there are different other industry alliances from the past that came up with frameworks and methodology for embedded system security testing. So I believe OWASP also has an initiative for that. For the EU markets, I believe the ones ETSI and the ones that's being worked out from in Senelec will be the primary guiding ones, whereas in the US there is NIST, standardizing these security practices, and so they already have again a set of rules that you can adhere to with your designs.
All right, thank you. Next question, any specific tools and hardware that are required or a pen tester should have to perform embedded systems and IoT pen test?
Obviously, there are great resources. We have a collection of this on our knowledge base, but you can just search for tools. So there are many software tools that you can use for IoT testing. The Kali distribution would in general come with a lot of these tools. Hardware tools are a different question. There are very cool gadgets that you can use for different purposes, wireless testing, Bluetooth testing. If you dig deeper, there are, apart from software issues, there could be side channel attacks. And for that, there are some good choices. I don't want to say brands here and market anyone here, but in a personal DMs, I'm happy to suggest specific tools if you're interested. There are a lot of hardware tools as well. You should definitely get an oscilloscope, a logic analyzer for hardware testing. It's often a case that manufacturers leave open some say serial ports interfaces on the PCB. You can probe on that, and you can hook up a little UART interface to get sometimes a working root shell even, and there are many software tools as well in the open source community as well, and among other resources that again you can probably find.
Was the hardware testing something that you enjoyed? Because I could just see your eyes light up as you were talking about this.
Actually, Gergo is better, our co-founder. But yeah, I used to do a lot of these, like disassembling, TV set-top boxes, and analyzing. This kind of system software just feels closer to the hardware, and there's something good about understanding the whole system as a whole, the interplay of hardware and software. Maybe that's just me, but hopefully I share this with some of our security researchers here. This kind of passion. Are there any questions?
No, there were just some questions about the recording and the slides, but yes, I emphasize again that these will be shared with you. So just as a last poll, a final one, if you see this, like it's only a question about whether you think that consulting about security services is something that could be helpful for your company or not. But other than that, yes, this concludes our webinar, and I really hope that you found some valuable takeaways in this, and I want to thank you again for coming, and thank Attila as well for preparing these slides for us. So have a great evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and thank you so much for attending.
Thank you very much.
Bye.